I'm looking at our schedule and I'm looking at what our test covers and I'm looking at how many lectures we have left before the scheduled test. And I'm fairly certain I'm not going to get all the material covered by test day. So we've got two options here. And our options are keep the test scheduled for 3:31, and I will go adjust the test to what we cover after we finish class on the 30th, or move the test window to 4:2 and 4:3, which would be a after class on Thursday, say noon on the 1st through Saturday, maybe the 3rd, and have the test window then over the planned chapters of 4, 5, and 6. I don't care which one we do. So what do you guys think?
I'm okay with either one of those. Yeah, I guess having the extra, is it a whole chapter that we're gonna miss, or is it just like a
It'd be a part of a chapter. I got a poll up for you.
Okay.
You can just vote, right? And let's see what we get here. Move the test. Move it to the
so if we extend the test, do the due dates for the quiz also get extended?
Yeah, well, yeah, it would be a few hours, right? It would be a few hours. I'll move the quiz dates out to ending right before the test like they are now. So
okay, awesome.
Yeah, it does. That's the only time I close the quizzes is while test windows are open, right? I close them once the window comes open. So I'd move the quiz out too. That's not a problem. Or quiz is. No, it's just it's do you want to take the test on the 31st and the 1st, or do you want to take the test on the 2nd and 3rd, basically? So move it or yeah, I did. Yeah, I got finally got to a barber. So right now, let's see. Thank you. My hat's fit again, so that's nice. Most of us, it looks like, we got 5 that haven't voted yet, and that would be enough to make a difference. So if you haven't voted, go ahead and cast a vote, and let's see where we go on this. They are in the same week. It just would be moving it from the 31st. So the week of the 30th and the 1st, right now, the test would happen between the Tuesday and Thursday lecture. If we did it after the 3rd, move the test after the Thursday lecture, I would finish the chapter, I think, on the 1st, and then you could test on chapters 4, 5, and 6. So if we don't move it, I will shrink the test down to cover what we've covered, and I will move those questions over what we haven't covered to the next test, right? So you'll still get the same material. You'll just be tested between the two. Yeah, well, I mean, that's not a bad point, Samantha. So right now we're back to 6 and 6, right? Which means I make the decision. So now we're edging. It's a horse race, people. It's fun to watch, right? No, that's all good. Just you don't have to tell anybody. I'm not showing responses. So just vote the way that works for you, and let's see what the class kind of thinks. At this point, if there's only a 1 or 2 vote difference, then I guess I do have a preference. My preference would be move the exam and keep all of the test questions together that are the same, right? So in that sense, I would rather all of chapter 6 be on one test than be split between two tests, only because I think that helps you all a little bit and that you, right, can focus by chunks. But if it doesn't matter to you, it doesn't matter to me. We're starting to see, right? We're starting to see a change. I guess there's a third option. I hadn't thought about this. I mean, well, no, there's not a third option. I'm not going to open it on the 31st and keep it open longer, because then I'll still be lecturing on material. Not take it at all. There's a third option. Yeah, a lot of y'all are thinking the same way, right? So if we didn't take it at all, would I give you all 50% or 0 or 100%, right? All right. Yeah, I knew what your answer would be, right? No brainer, exactly. So okay, we're starting to see a pretty solid setup now. You know, I love people that'll work with me, Samantha. So I appreciate that. All right, so here's what we're going to do, and I'll send out an email to everybody. I'll post it as an announcement as well. We're going to move the exam. So we will lecture on 4/1. I will open the test window at noon on April the 1st, and I will have it open longer. We'll have it open through April the 3rd. So you'll have 2.5 days instead of 2 days to find the time that you want to take it in. Yeah, no, almost a big deal, right? So that's what we'll do is we'll move it to noon on the 1st. And so I'll finish lecturing. We'll probably get done with chapter 6 somewhere during the 1st. And so I might move on to chapter 7, but the test will be, as it says in the syllabus, chapters 4, 5, and 6. And we will just shift the time frame over. Okay? I almost said something like that when I saw it was on the 1st, but I didn't want to confuse anybody. That's like, yeah, this is a joke. No, it's okay. So let me write a note that we're going to do that from 4/1 at noon to 4/3 at 11:59, right, p.m. So you'll have 2.5 days to find some time. All right, so there we go. I finally used the polling option in Blackboard. See, I learned something today. Okay, so where are we? We're moving the test. I've got that written down. And we are talking still about interest groups. We're closing that out. Just a few slides left on that. Okay, we were slide 34 was our last slide, right? So this is what we talked about last time, was we got to discussing how interest groups try to manage themselves, manage their size, and how that size affects what they try to do, whether they're going to be targeted on their issues, or whether they're going to try to be a big enough organization to use their membership as leverage, like AARP does. So there's a lot that they could do there as far as using material benefits or a solidarity, which is a group kind of focus where, hey, we're all in this together and let's hang out and let's talk and we've got this thing in common as a motivator. Or they're going to use just the goal of the interest group, which is if it's business oriented profit or policy that helps the business, or if it's an interest group focused on social justice or welfare or individual injustices and perspectives than on fixing those problems in society. And a lot of groups, of course, do a mix of all three of these, right? So it's not an either or, but it's something they have to keep in mind that while they're here as an organization to impact politics and get what they want, they also have to manage themselves as an organization, and that impacts how they go about doing their business. So that's where we finished last time. The last topic we really have to cover, two topics to cover today. Real quick one was on what we call the free rider problem, and then we'll talk about interest groups as part of democratic theory real quick. The free rider problem was an interesting kind of issue brought up by a guy named Mancur Olsen. And he had an observation that the effectiveness of an interest group sometimes depends on the goal that that interest group has. For a business-oriented interest group or for an interest group that's chasing a particular issue, that is, if it's solved, is going to benefit that interest group, his observation doesn't apply. But he was one of the first to realize that sometimes what you're trying to get done impacts your ability to get it done. And so what he was saying was, if the goal of your interest group is to deliver what he would call a public good or a collective good, that's a harder sell sometimes, because if we as potential members to an interest group are fairly rational about what we're trying to do and who we're going to join, we're going to look at this and go, you're an interest group that wants me to join and to give you money and then to work on your behalf, on our behalf. And the goal of this interest group is a collective good. In this case, let's take clean water. And I'm sitting here looking at this going, well, yes, I like clean water. Right? I like to drink clean water. I like to go to a lake that's got clean water in it and go boating or swimming or skiing or wakeboarding or whatever. I like clean waters if I'm a fisherman, right? To go get fish out of or whatever the case is where I'm interacting with water. Clean water is almost always a better product than not. So I'm interested in that. And I might be interested enough to join your organization and pay your membership fees and work on behalf of the organization to try to get this result. However, I also know that if, as an interest, you're successful and you get policy put into place that starts delivering better, cleaner water, I'm going to get the benefit of that cleaner water, whether I've joined your interest group or not. So from my perspective as a potential member, right, we're moving the test. I'll send an email about it, Riley. We're going to move the test back a day into the future one day. So I'll send an email with details, unless somebody else wants to chat with you real quick and fill you in on it. So as someone with a limited amount of funds and a limited amount of attention span, I have to choose where I want to spend my money and spend my time. And I may have multiple interests that I want to get involved in. Maybe I'm interested in voting rights. Maybe I'm interested in clean water, whatever the case may be. But I've got a limited budget and limited amount of time. I've got to choose. And if I'm faced with a choice between joining an interest group where I have to be a member of that group to get the benefit, or joining an interest group where I get the benefit whether I'm a member or not, wouldn't it be rational for me to join the one that I have to be a member of to get the benefit and hope that there are enough people working on the other one that delivers clean water as well so that I get both but only have to work on one or pay for one. And this is what Mancur Olsen is pointing out, is that the goal of your interest group, if it's a collective good or a public good, could actually generate some disincentive to individual people to join your interest group, because if they can get a free ride to the results without having to pay the cost, it's kind of rational for them to do that if they can. And so this represents another challenge to an interest group and managing its size and building their membership roles. They might have to overcome this if the purposeful goal of the interest group is a collective good. Then they're going to have to do something else to convince me to join their group, right? If the purposeful argument itself is not enough, right? If I've been rational and I've thought about it, then they're going to have to come out with something else. And this is where we go back to maybe those material goods or those solidarity benefits that an interest group provides, and where they may put money or effort into that to try to overcome this other perception, and a true perception, right? It's not incorrect, that I could probably get this for nothing if I'm right, if I want to try that. And so they need to incentivize me to join, to pay the membership fee, to get involved, even though what they're chasing is a collective good, and I would probably get it anyway if they're successful. Came up with this idea, right? It's also, the reason it's called a free rider problem is because the example he gave was of streetcar, right? And so, if you've been around streetcars and watched how they work, right? If you get on the streetcar and get a seat, you have to pay. But if at the last minute you jump on the steps of the streetcar and hold on to the handles there at the edge, you can ride right for free to the next destination and jump off. So you might get the free ride, right? And so this is, the illusion that he's building here is the same kind of thing from an interest group perspective. And so interest groups have to recognize what their goal is, and that might impact what benefits they have to put out there for their membership to build it, maintain it over time. Does that make sense? And so, right, an interest group, right, that has a collective good as its purposeful benefit may have to provide selective benefits in the name of material or solidarity, right, as we see, right, on this previous slide down here. So if your interest group is providing its purposeful goal, right, is a collective benefit, they may have to up these kind of benefits to encourage people to join. Okay, the last little bit on this, on interest groups, is going back to the idea of them being right, part of the democratic process, part of the political process, and playing a role as a linkage institution, right, between us, the members of society, and the government that we're focused on. So at the beginning of the semester, when we spent a lot of time talking about democracy and what it means and kind of how it works and some of the concerns with it, I brought up three perspectives of how democracy, two of how democracy might be, and a third of a non-democratic process that might be the case when we're talking politics, and that was the theory of pluralism and hyperpluralism, and then elite theory. And if you remember, pluralism was the idea that our democratic system right here in Texas has enough doors, windows, or opportunities, however you want to phrase it, that let people into the political process. They can engage their policymakers, right? The resources are there, the opportunities are there for the public to engage the government and get the government to do what it wants and to respond to their requests, their desires, their issues and problems. And so the theory of pluralism is that a democratic institution, right, has enough opportunities there to let democracy happen, to let people get involved in the process. And that's healthy, that's good. That's what makes a democracy strong, is if it has these resources for people to use and get involved and to engage their decision makers. The second theory was the theory of hyperpluralism, and that was, yes, this is a pluralist system. Yes, there are many ways that many people or many groups can get involved. Unfortunately, it's so successful that it's bogging the system down, and it's leading to gridlock, and the system is not as efficient or getting anything done at all. And so all of these opportunities can sometimes be a problem. And then the third theory, the democracy as a description of how our democracy, right, and at this point you put that in air quotes, right, our democracy might work, is that it's really just a continual struggle between the haves and the have-nots, the elites and everybody else. And most of the opportunity and most of the resources rest in the hands of the elite, and they control the political system. And it's not very democratic, and if it is, it's a democracy that exists between elites. And those of us that are not part of that class, right, that are the have-nots, are kind of shut out of the system. And that's a very poor perspective on how this might be working. I bring these back up because when we talked about it the first time, we talked about it in the sense of individual representation and individual interaction with government. It really plays out on a bigger scale and a better resolution if we look at it as interest group interaction, right? It's our democracy as it operates in Texas today is probably pluralistic, a stronger pluralistic system, maybe even hyper pluralistic, if we look at it from the impact of groups on the governmental process and getting involved in the governmental process. And we see those interest groups spending their money and representing their membership and having their lobbyists go into the legislature and talk to our Texas senators and reps. Right, if we look to what's really happening, most of the time we probably see that. And the argument here is if all of us are aware of that, all of us are understanding how these groups get involved and how those groups are a linkage for us if we join and get involved with those groups, still promote a democratic system, but one that's kind of organized more around group interaction than just individual action, right? It's still very democratic, and it's still a representative system that works for us. We just have to realize that while we can still engage individually as a citizen and expect some impact and some communication with our political system, we're probably going to be a lot more effective if we approach this democratic system through group orientation, right? Through these interest groups, through political parties, right? In that sense, both of those are organizations of people that are going to have probably a more profound impact on policy and practice than an individual. Not that an individual can't, but it's probably easier through the groups. So in this sense, I want to remind you of those theories of democracy: pluralism, hyperpluralism, and elite theory, and get you to think a little bit about how these are also group theories of democracy and how it works. Make sense? All right. So we're going to roll up chapter 5. We're done with that, right? And we're going to move to chapter 6 now, which is a pretty big set of information that we're going to look at here. I refer to it as campaigns and voting behavior, or elections and voting behavior. And we're going to kind of step back and forth between state level elections and campaigns and national level elections and campaigns, because there's good information on both, and you're probably exposed more often to what's going on at the national level, And so I can use that as an example to explain the state level as well. They work almost exactly the same. So we'll work through that. So we're going to talk about campaigns and elections first, and then later we'll start talking about our actions and our behavior as voters, and how we, as voters, interact with the system in our role as a voter, not just as a citizen. So we start off with looking at campaigns, and of course we want to know what we're talking about. So we ask the question, what is a campaign? And it's pretty simple, right? The campaign is a process that any candidate undertakes to try to win a political office, right? It can be a very poorly organized and unfunded campaign. Hey, family and friends, I've filled out my form and paid my fee. I'm running for this office. Please vote for me. And then the election happens and you don't get elected because that's all you did. And no one except your immediate friends and family know who you are. And so you don't get elected. And surprisingly, that happens a lot. When we say, and this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about presidential campaigns. Our last presidential election, how many people did we have running for president in the general election? Anybody know? I don't even know the actual right answer, right? We know, right, that there was Donald Trump running for the Republican Party. We know that there was Joe Biden running from the Democratic Party. We know that there was a Libertarian and a Green Party candidate. The Libertarian was Joe Jorgensen, and I don't know the Green Party candidate. So we know there were at least 4, right? Right. Those are the ones you could have really known about. Generally, there's another 10 to 15 candidates for president that no one knows about, right? They pay the filing fee to file it in their state as a candidate for president. They don't have a political party supporting them. And we don't know who they are, right? But they're out there as official candidates that somewhere appear on a state ballot, right? And a lot of times you're going to get, 8, 10, 12 candidates for president that aren't on the ballot that you see when you go to vote in your state. Because the way our system is set up, if you're going to run for president, you have to open a campaign and file in every state. There are 50 campaigns to be president, one in each of the states. And some people will file a presidential election campaign, right? They'll file that to run for that office. They'll pay the fee in their state, but not in any of the rest of them. So you've got, all of these other folks running for president that we don't know anything about because, and it's not a big deal, they can't win, right? Even if they won their state, they're not going to be a president, right? And this happens in state and local politics as well, right? A lot of times we're focused on, right, the campaigns that are backed by the major parties. And then backed by the third parties that we know about, libertarians and Greens, and that's usually about it. And we don't even always know about them, right? But there are also candidates out there that are running for office that we never hear about, even if they're running for an office that we're going to vote for. And it might be the case that you show up to the polls and you're looking at, right, a list of candidates that are running for office, and you're like, who are these other 3 people, right? I see the Democrat and the Republican. Who are these other people? Well, they're on the ballot in your state or in your district or your precinct. But yeah, sometimes for me too, right? because they paid the fee, but they didn't run a campaign, or they didn't run a campaign that was very successful, right? The only campaign they ran was I filled out the paperwork and paid my filing fee. Okay, fine. But a campaign is from that little bit of work to the big campaigns that we see where people are running, right? You're running for governor of Texas and you're going to all 254 counties, maybe multiple times, and you're giving lots of speeches and you're talking to lots of people and shaking lots of hands and you're spending lots of money, right? And you're raising money all over the state, right? Those kind of campaigns we can see and we can pay attention to if we want to, because they're very much out there, right? So campaigning, right? Having a political campaign, anybody can do it if you got a filing fee, if you'll pay the filing fee, right? But whether or not it's going to be successful or not is right, dependent on a lot of other factors that we'll talk about. And then when we look at the total process of filing a campaign fee to actually winning an election, we actually see that most candidates that are successful are running two campaigns. The first campaign they run is what we call a nomination campaign. And that's where, say you're running for governor of Texas, let's say you're a Democrat and you want to be governor of Texas. And so, right, you're fairly well known in the state, or in at least political circles and in your Democratic Party. So you file the filing fee to run for governor. And then, right, what you realize real quick is there are 2 or 3 other Democrats that have the same idea. And they've filed and they're running for governor also. And so the first campaign you're running is a campaign against those other members of your party. And your party and the people that identify with your party are going to vote in a primary in Texas and pick between the 4 of you Democrats, right? So the folks that vote in the Democratic primary are going to look at the ballot and they're going to see 4 people that are running for governor that are all Democrats, and they're going to vote for one. And so the first campaign you're running as a candidate is to win that nomination campaign. You're trying to win the nomination of your political party, right? So that in the general election, your whole party is now supporting you, hopefully, as the single Democrat running to win election and take the office of governor. So the second campaign you run is the election campaign. After the primaries are over and you've been declared by your party to be their nominee, now you're running against the Republican Party nominee and the Libertarian Party nominee and the Green Party nominee, and the 4 of you from different parties, right, in Texas, that's going to be your major people, right, are running to win the election and take the office. And in Texas, right now, that means the Republican's going to win, right? That's slowly changing, and it's becoming more competitive and between the Republicans and Democrats. And so we might see Democrats become viable at state offices as well. But I don't think a Democrat's been elected to a statewide office in Texas in about 30 years, maybe 25. A little hazy on exactly when in the early 90s, the last time a Democrat got elected, but I think it was like 92. And so that being the case, right, if you're a Republican in Texas and you want to run for governor, your odds, right, if you win your primary, are pretty good that you're going to win the general election. If you're a Democrat right now, the odds are not good at all. You might win your nomination campaign and win the nomination of your party, but you're probably not going to win, right, the statewide election that actually selects governor, because, right, Texas is predominantly a Republican held state right now. So 2 campaigns here that we can look at, right? Nomination campaign to win the nomination of your party so that you can run for office, and then the actual general election campaign that will result in the statewide election that will determine who wins office. So we're going to talk about the process that goes on with both of these. So let's talk about the nomination campaign. Again, you're trying to win your party's endorsement. How do you do that? Well, in a state like Texas, that's, you know, approximately 850 miles north-south, and even a little longer, 890 miles or so east-west or whatever. This is a big process, right? You want to win a statewide office in Texas, you're going to have to do some work, right? You're going to have to get out there and make things happen. And so you've got to organize, right, a group that's going to support you and help you raise money, get it involved and get the media to cover you, and generate some kind of election momentum. And so your process here is, right, focus on the 3 M's: money, media, and momentum, right? Raise money, engage the media, because you're, you know, 30 million people maybe in Texas. You can't talk to all of them one-to-one. You're going to have to use, right, broadcast to get there. So now you're going to go all over the place, but you're still going to be engaging the media most of the time as a way to deliver messages about who you are and what you support and why people ought to vote for you. And so with such a big project, you're going to have to come up with some kind of strategy of how you're going to raise money, where you're going to spend that money, so that you can generate enough momentum to turn out votes to win. And that's going to take a while, right? And it's not going to be easy. In Texas, it takes usually a couple years for people to start building a big enough recognition base to be an effective statewide candidate. If you're running for a House district position, to be a House representative, you're running a Senate district, to be a senator in the state legislature, obviously that scales things down. But even if you divide Texas up into 150 House districts or 31 Senate districts, there's still a lot of Texas there, and there's still a lot of people there that you're going to have to organize a campaign and run an effective campaign in both nomination and election if you're lucky enough to get there. So you got to sit and look at this whole process and figure out how long do you need. The less well-known you are, the longer you're probably going to need to get people to know who you are. If you've already got some name recognition, it might be a little shorter process. You might be able to line up money a little quicker. Right? So name recognition is important in these functions, but generally speaking, from thinking about running to actually running is going to be a multi-year effort in Texas, right? You know, a year and a half, maybe 2 years. If you're a good candidate that just doesn't win, you might run multiple times, right? And so it may be a couple years, 3 years, 4 years, right? So, you know, this is not something that if you're looking to be successful, you really count on 6 months and I'm elected and I'm in office, right? It just doesn't really happen that way. And if we look right at like presidential elections, right? I look at Donald Trump in this last re-election run for him, right? So he gets elected in 2016, takes office in January of 2016. He did his first re-election campaign stop in June of 2016. So he essentially started running for re-election, in June of 2016. He ran for, essentially had campaign stops for 3.5 years to try to win re-election. And you know, it's the same for the Democratic candidates, right? So they started that process, right? At the national level, it could be even longer. So these things are long, right? And because they're long, they're expensive, right? And so, you know, we gotta pay attention to that. And if you ever think about running for office, you have to pay attention to the fact that this is not just a, I think I'll do this, right? There's a lot of planning and effort here. And if nobody knows you, except maybe a few folks in your political party, you're going to have to do a lot more work just to get people to know who you are, right? It doesn't have to be this way. I want you to understand that this is, in some sense, a peculiar American process to elections, right? In other countries, campaigns are restricted in how long they can last, partially because they're not so candidate-centered. They're more party-centered. So you, as a voter, are focusing on a party that you think represents you. And when you go to the elections, you're voting for parties and for representatives that are in the party. You don't really care necessarily about most of the individuals that are going to be in them, because the party is the organizational focus there. But in the United States and in Texas, right, that's not the case. We're individually focused. We're candidate focused. Right. And the party is a part and parcel of that and helps give us some information and some indication about who these people are and what they might stand for, but not always. Right. And so what it means to be a Republican or Democrat in Texas and running as a candidate for one of those parties in Texas is very, very different to what a Republican and a Democrat running for office in Massachusetts would look like and what they would say. And they might, right, you've got a person running for governor from the Republican Party of Texas, and you compare to them a person running for governor for the Republican Party in Massachusetts. If you compared those two candidates, they would look nothing alike. Their policies would be very different. Their perspectives would be very different, yet they're still called Republicans. In other countries, that difference wouldn't exist. They're Republicans. They'll have generally the same party platform that they're running on. That's not the same here necessarily, right? Really, to say you're a Republican within a state in the United States means to say you're more conservative than the Democrat running for the same office is going to be. And for the Democrat, it means you're more liberal than the Republican running. But from state to state, that comparison falls apart somewhat. It might certainly be the case that in Texas, a Democrat running for office, especially statewide office, that's got some kind of clout and maybe potential of winning, is going to be more conservative on their political policies than the Republican in another state, right? So you gotta drill down, because we're candidate focused more so than party focused. And so here, it takes longer because you got to know the individuals. You can't just focus, right, for a few weeks on figuring out what the parties are standing for. A prime minister and parliamentary elections in Britain take 4 to 5 weeks on average to run an election. I think Israel is running their 4th national election in 2 years right now. They're planning to run their 4th national election for the was it the Kennett? I think the parliamentary group there in Israel. So other countries, right, can do these things a lot differently because they focus on different operational components for making decisions in politics, parties instead of people. Here in the U.S., right, not so much. So we don't get the fast, cheap, and easy. We get the long, expensive, and detailed, and in the weeds approach to electing people. So, I mean, in Texas, just to give you an example, a lot of times we can see who the party candidates are going to be by looking at down ballot options of what they're running for. So I can tell you that 3 to 4 years ago, Ken Paxton, who's currently our Attorney General, ran for that office of Attorney General because he has some plans on someday being the governor of Texas. Right? In Texas, especially if you're a Republican, The Attorney General's office is a great first elected of office to get into, right? And if you do, right, you get doors, opportunities open for you. It's not unusual at all, right? Our current governor was, Governor Abbott was previously the Attorney General of Texas. One of our current U.S. senators, John Cornyn, was previously the Attorney General of Texas, right? And so I can tell you just from that history and that perspective, as it goes back over time, right, that Ken Paxton, when he was deciding to run for Attorney General, almost certainly had in the back of his mind that he was using that as a stepping stone to eventually run for governor, which means in his mind, he started in his head the campaign for governor years ago, right? Now, the other thing that goes on during the nomination campaign, or the results of the nomination campaign, the primaries in Texas, is that we also in Texas start selecting our delegates for our presidential electoral college in our primary process. And so when we show up to the polls in March of an election year to vote in a primary, our parties in the background are starting to work on delegate selection for the Electoral College from Texas. And most of us don't know this, right? Most of us, we go to our primaries, we vote for the candidates on the ballot that we want to vote for, and we go home. And we don't understand that our Republican and Democratic and Libertarian and Green parties are going to have a process that occurs fairly directly right after that primary to take the results of that primary and start allocating delegates to precincts and then districts and then the state and then to the state electoral college selection. So our results and our participation in those primaries plays a bit of a role, right, in lining out the folks that will eventually represent our party at the state level as it organizes its party platform, represents our precincts and districts at the state convention. And then at that state convention, we'll be selecting delegates from the state to represent our parties at their national conventions, which will eventually be we'll select delegates for our electoral college. That's part of that primary process and part of the end result of the nomination campaigns that candidates are going through. So we're focused on the candidates and that are running for nomination in their office. We're not paying attention to the caucus environment that happens after that selects delegates, but that's an important part of it. In states that don't have primaries, instead have caucuses, right? Texas is a primary state, right? We show up in March, we go to our voting booth and our polls, and we walk in and they say, you're going to vote in the which primary, the Republican primary, the Democratic primary, which one? And you tell them, and they give you a ballot with only those candidates from that party on it. And you go vote, and then you go home. In states that have caucuses, right, you show up right where your party in your precinct is having a caucus, a meeting, and you show up, and it's a public process. You're all in an auditorium together. And people are standing up saying, okay, how many people here are interested in supporting this candidate or this candidate? And you can stand up and talk and say, people, you ought to support this candidate because, and it's a group meeting of party members in that precinct or district that are casting their votes as in this group process to select their candidates. And they then also select delegates. So they're actually playing a part there and they see that part. And that's why I like to talk about both of these, because most of us, since we're in a primary state, have no idea how the delegate process gets kicked off. And it happens right in your precinct, which is the smallest voting element of an election process. So and the people that are eligible to go to those meetings, right? are the people that have voted in that primary inside that party's primary. So if I show up at a polling place and say I want to vote in the Republican primary, and they give me a Republican ballot, I can then go participate, right, as a Republican voter in helping pick delegates when they have their meeting at a later time. But I couldn't go to the Democratic one, which, right, is the only constraint that happens on that. Now later we'll talk about how primaries are set up, and we'll talk about open and closed and semi-closed and blanket primaries, and some of that will tie into that. Does anybody know offhand what kind of primaries we use in Texas? What type of primary we have? We're a little confusing, right? Because some of us times we're described as having a semi-open or semi-closed process, and sometimes just an open process. But essentially, the primaries in Texas, you get to vote in the primary you want to vote in. In some states, right, you fill out a registration card, and you indicate on that registration card what party you belong to. And then when you show up at the polls, they have your registration card, and they go, oh, you're registered as a Democrat. Here's your Democratic ballot. When we register to vote in Texas, we don't put anything on our registration card about belonging to a party or not. So when we show up at a primary in Texas, they ask us, which primary do you want to vote in? And you tell them, I'd like to vote in the Democratic one. They give you a Democratic ballot, and it's got Democratic candidates on it. You could be a Republican in your head, right? And decide you want to vote in the Democratic primary, and you could. Right? Nothing stops you from doing that in Texas. So it's kind of an interesting process. So anyway, just be of mind that this delegate stuff is happening in the background in Texas because we use a primary system. And I've been talking about the difference between caucuses and primaries right here, right? And so some states, a couple states still use the older group-oriented caucus process of selecting candidates from their party at the precinct level. Most states have transitioned from caucus to primary, where we actually vote in a booth, and as we select the party we're going to vote for, and we do that, and then that's how the process kicks off. Does that make sense? There's a lot going on there, but any questions before I move on to talk about the impacts of campaigns? This to me is a really interesting kind of discussion. Obviously, political campaigns are an integral process in picking candidates for office. So the impact of a campaign, obviously, is that there are going to be winners and losers. But this focus here is on how do the campaigns impact voters, right, or potential voters, and right, we look at these candidates and they're running a campaign to convince people to vote for them. Well, how successful is that? How does that actually work? And what we know is that campaigns can have three impacts. They usually only have one and a little bit. Okay. So the most prominent, in-your-face result of a political campaign is a impact of reinforcement. So someone's running for office and they put out campaign information, they do a campaign speech, they put out a campaign ad. And for most of us that are voters, we see the ad maybe come up and go, oh, that's so-and-so, that's Governor Abbott running for re-election. Now, if I'm a Republican, conservative that supports Republicans in Texas, I might watch that ad and I'm watching it and I'm getting reinforced. I'm hearing things that I already agree with, right? I've probably voted for for Abbott before, and I'm watching his reelection campaign. Right, he's given me this message about what he's going to do and what he stands for, and who he is, and I'm like, yep, that's the same guy I voted for last time. So this campaign process, if I'm already a Republican or conservative on that side of, is really just acting to reinforce what I already believe. And most of the time, this is all campaign work does. Let me give you an example. So let me ask you a question, and your answer will give the example. How many of you have ever been to a political campaign event? A campaign speech, say, where candidates are talking. Irish, you are going to be in the majority, right? Most of us don't go to them. Those that do, right? If we were to go poll everybody that shows up at a campaign event for a candidate, a large, overwhelming majority of those folks already support that candidate. They're there cheering their side on. There will be some people that are there because they don't know, right? They're like, okay, this is one of the candidates, say, for governor, right? And I'm going to sit and listen to them and see what I think about them. Right? They're there to try to make up their mind. So there'll be a percentage of folks that are there, right? Most of the percentage of folks that are there are already supporting that candidate, and this is a rah-rah event, right? This is a pep rally for them. This is a reinforcement activity for most of those people. Some people there will be there to get information. Very few people there are going to show up and say, right, like the meme, right? They throw their table out and they hang their sign and say, okay, change my mind, right? That's not what happens at these events, right? Most of the time, these campaign events are not, even though they might be organized to do this, they are not there changing people's minds, because the people that already believe something different don't go, right? If you were a Trump supporter in this last presidential election, when Joe Biden came to Austin, why would you go listen to Joe talk? You've already made up your mind, right? The people that go are going because they want to, support that candidate and maybe, right, support themselves in their decision, right, to activate themselves. So campaigns most of the time serve to reinforce opinions and beliefs we already have. They give the opportunity to activate people, to excite people, to get people an opportunity to get involved, right? Become a volunteer for whatever candidate it is, donate money to their campaign, buy a hat, right? Buy yourself a red hat or a blue hat or whatever hat is that's being sold, right? So most of the impact of campaigns is going to be reinforcement. Some of the impact of campaigns is going to be an activation kind of response. Very few people, right, watch, say, a debate or something between the candidates, and at the end of that debate go, oh, well, I was completely wrong. This other candidate is the one that I want. It can happen. It can happen. It's not impossible, but conversion is hard, right? And most of the time, what we really have is not a conversion of I'm a Biden supporter and I became a Trump supporter, or I'm a Beto supporter and I became a Cruz supporter. That's not usually what we see. Usually what we see is I haven't made up my mind yet, and you can convert me from undecided to decided, right? You might move me that way. Almost never do you move from Trump to something else or Biden to Trump. And the reason for that are pretty straightforward. Most of the time, right, a conversion like that, right, from one convert you from supporting one candidate and usually a political party to a different candidate and a different political party requires you to change your mind. And people don't do that, right? People are, right, in general, fairly obstinate about changing their mind, because the first thing that has to happen to change your mind is you have to admit that you were wrong, that you didn't either have all the information and something new and different has come along, or that you were wrong about what you believed and, right, you had to overcome that. That's not human nature usually. So the third impact of a campaign can be conversion. It's not impossible, but it's generally tough. And this again is the time I want to reference presidential campaigns, because we see this if we're watching it. When, say, political candidates have a debate, you will see some of the news organizations put together panels of voters. And some of those voters will be supporting one candidate, some will be supporting the other, some will be panels of undecided. And very seldom do you see, right, they'll interview them. So you just saw the president or you just saw the candidate for president talk about this. What do you think now, right? And they'll give them surveys before they come in about who they think and what they think and who they support. And then they'll do post-debate surveys and see. And what we see is that most people don't change because it requires an awful lot of effort to do that. Does this make sense? How many of y'all have ever been in an argument with somebody, and let's say it's a family member or someone you're in a relationship with, and you realize you've been arguing over something for, let's say, 10 minutes. And after 10 minutes, you realize you're wrong. They've won the argument. You know this in your head. How many of you admit that you lost and tell the person you're arguing against, you're correct. You've changed my mind. If you're like me, yeah, I don't do that usually. I'm just like, well, we'll just have to agree to disagree. It's hard, right? It's hard to fess up and say, you're right. I was wrong and you're right, and I'm changing my mind. That's hard, right? And it does, I agree, Vern, it depends, right? Sometimes it's, the situation matters, the topic matters, the people that you're in that discussion or debate with matters. Whatever, which is not an admission that you lost. It's I'm done with this, right? And I'm not talking anymore. And that's because that next step is hard, right? It's hard for people to do that. So I guess on one side, if people that you care about and stuff do admit to being wrong, be gracious, because they just did something hard, right? They just did a hard thing to say that they were wrong. But in politics, we're not going to see that very often, right? Very, very seldom are we going to see somebody say, yeah, I've changed my mind, because this conversion process is difficult, right? And if you're religious at all, right? And there's a conversion process that happens in religion where non-believers or believers of different faith come into your religion and they convert. Most religions have a fairly significant celebration of that conversion, right? The fact that somebody committed to their religion and their beliefs, right? The people that also believe that, right, support that and right, stand behind that and congratulate and celebrate that, because conversions are difficult, and especially, right, life-changing conversions are difficult. So we need to realize that that's part and parcel of the impacts of campaigns, or maybe not so much the impacts of campaigns. It just doesn't happen often, right? Most of the time, candidates are preaching to the choir, and the choir is happy to be they're supporting them, maybe even getting some energy from them, getting them activated and energized, but very seldom are they preaching to the other choir and that person, they change over. So those are the three possible impacts. The first two are the ones that you'll see, and reinforcement is the biggest of the three, right? So conversion is difficult. Some of the things I didn't mention, of course, is that most of us aren't even paying attention to the arguments and the debates, and you can't change your mind if you're not paying attention, right? But how many of us watch the debates? How many of us watch, right, when our governor or potential governors are out on the campaign trail and they do something? The answer is not a lot of us. And then there's this thing called selective perception that we exercise, that is a normal human reaction. When we hear things that we don't agree with, we tend to just not listen to them, right? We perceive and pay attention to the things we already agree and like, and we hear somebody speaking something different or something contrary to what we believe or want to believe, we generally don't engage, right? We just Lauren, we say whatever, right? And we keep going on with whatever we're doing. We don't even have the argument, right? And so the opportunity for people to convert is not usually there. We're not paying attention, and if we are paying attention, if it's contrary to where we stand, we move away. A couple other things come into play here as well, about conversion as far from one side politically to another. One is that fewer people are actually committing to one side to begin with, right? So fewer people are calling themselves Democrats, fewer people are calling themselves Republicans. So there's less opportunity, there are fewer people to convert. Unless you go after the growing group, which is the independents, and try to get them to come to your side. They don't do that very often. Most of those independents are disaffected Republicans and Democrats, and they're not going to go back to those parties. So their party identification has declined, and they've started calling themselves independents, which means I'm going to vote the way I vote, but it's not going to be necessarily tied to what party you say you're a member of, and that party's identification. So it's yet another opportunity where you might convert through a debate situation that's not there. What do you got in mind there, Vern? You say, isn't that a contradiction? What do you mean there? Wouldn't an independent be carefree? They could be, right? They certainly could be. An independent could be carefree in that they're not going to pay attention to the political process or to the election. And in that sense, right, there's no conversion that's going to happen because they're not paying attention. Yeah, it doesn't matter to them. But when we talk to independents, what we find out quite often is they do care, but the reason that they used to get from the party doesn't work for them. Andrew.
I can kind of speak to that. It's not exactly being carefree. It just kind of like feels like, well, no matter what, we have a fucking idiot as our choice. That's kind of how it feels.
Let's go with idiot.
Yeah, sorry, excuse me, but
that's all good.
That's how it feels. It just feels that way as an independent. It's just like it's not carefree. It's the exact opposite of that. It feels like you have no way of winning.
Right, you're going to lose regardless of who wins office.
Yeah.
Right, and there's a large number of people that feel that way, right? In the sense, especially if you look at these last two elections, somewhat this election really pronounced in the Clinton-Trump election, presidential election. There was a huge number of people that said, I don't like either of these candidates, and I'm going to vote for the least worst of the two candidates. Right? Those people aren't carefree, but they're certainly disillusioned. Right? That's what you're tapping into, right, Andrew?
Yeah, I mean,
still
I had a,
engage.
with that particular election, I was gonna vote for the Libertarian candidate until he pulled a stunt on live TV where he faked a heart attack because he had smoked weed like 30 minutes before that. Yeah. It's like I'm all for that too, but it's just that's not the stunt. I was like, he's not gonna win, so I'm not gonna vote for him. I just won't say who I voted for, but yeah.
Yeah, no, and you don't have to. We're not pushing for that, certainly. Um, so now, but Vern's not wrong either, right? I mean, we're talking about different rationales for how people approach these processes, right? So, I mean, for some people, it's like, I don't know that any of this impacts me at all, and I don't care. I am carefree. But for other people, like Andrew's pointing out here, that's not the case, and they feel disillusioned or right disconnected. So Samantha tells us that Biden looks like Dracula. Uh, let's see. Lauren is talking about her parents claim to be independent and just pay attention to the candidates regardless of party. And a lot of independents do that, right? That's where they are now. They've jettisoned attachment to a political party and they're candidate focused. The problem, of course, with that is that one of the two major candidates from the major parties is almost certainly going to win. And if you're one of those folks that's looking at a candidate that didn't win the primary for their party, then you don't get right. You lost when they lost their primary bid, or you're looking at an independent or a green or a libertarian, right? You want that. You might even vote that, but the odds of that turning into a deciding factor, not so much. So Vern says that I just lost my screen again. Let me get back to it. Previous government professor says that people are independents but vote for a side that are not. People that are independent vote for a side and are not truly independent. Yeah, there's right. That's the disaffected group that I'm talking about. They used to be organizing themselves and lining up or aligning with a political party. And now the baggage of the political party has gotten so much that they don't want to admit that in public. So they're still probably Democratic or probably Republican in most of their viewpoints, but they're calling themselves independents. So they're not truly independent. That is definitely something that polling shows us, right? So your previous government professor is telling you true, right? 40 some odd percent of the voting electorate today calls themselves independent. Okay, more than support either political party. And so think about what it took, right? Generally, if you go back in time, historically, we've had somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 18% of the people call themselves independents of the political parties. And now we're up to 40% plus. So that 25% that have joined the middle independent between the party, not picking a party group, have somewhat converted, right? The party identification has declined. They've moved at least away from their old association. Iris, there might be some of that going on, right? That you're afraid, in a sense, not that somebody's going to hurt you necessarily, although some people have been hurt, but not that somebody's going to hurt you necessarily because you say, "Oh, I'm a Democrat in a Republican stronghold," or "I'm a Republican in a Democrat stronghold." The odds of that happening are possible, but fairly slim. But you might, right, be verbally attacked. You might be isolated. You might be, right, denigrated for saying that out loud, right? And it's because politics are getting ugly. Yeah, no one can have an opinion because you want to have opinion. You want to talk. You have one, but you don't talk about it, right? Because one, you don't want to deal with the baggage of having to defend yourself to everybody, and that's a real cost. That's a real problem. It's a real cost. If we were working this out the right way, when someone, right, say there were a group of 4 Republicans, because we're in Texas, and our 5th person walks into it and they identify themselves as Democrat, we wouldn't, as Republicans, start trying to own the libs, right? Or as Democrats start trying to passionately convert you to our perception of the world, right? So it's, you know, we've kind of militarized, in a sense, the approach of discussing politics between the parties, and it doesn't need to be that way, right? If more of us could be of the, okay, well, you know, I see where you're coming from. I even understand it a little bit, but I believe this, and this is why, you know, and then and you believing different doesn't make you a bad person. It just makes you a person with a different perspective, right? That kind of tolerance would be nice, right? If you didn't have to engage every conversation with the feeling in the back of your head that, well, if I tell them who I am, this is over, right? So that's definitely a part of it, right? Of how all this is happening and where it's going. The last reason that conversion is difficult is that you're, you know, for say a challenger, you're somebody that's wanting to upset an incumbent that's in office. That person that's an incumbent has already won before. So they pulled a majority of voters in a previous election. More often than not, you're going to be competing with them for those same voters and a few new voters that have aged into the process, right? And so for you to be successful, you've got to convert some of those people that probably voted for that other person to voting for you. And that's going to be tough. It's going to be tough for all the reasons we've already talked about, but it's also going to be tough because incumbents have a distinct advantage trying to win re-election versus a challenger trying to get elected the first time, right? And those advantages are pretty easy to understand. First off, they're in office. They've won an election. People probably know who they are. So when it's re-election time, they can start their re-election campaign from the perspective of, most of you know me, right? I don't have to spend a whole lot of time showing you who I am, right? You know me, and I've got a political history. I've got a voting record. I've been serving my constituents for this long now. That history and that perception serves them to start them further off on the election campaign process than somebody new. Somebody new is going to have to go, hey, I'm trying to upset this other person and get them kicked out of office, and here's who I am. Here's what I stand for. You're going to have to trust me on that because I don't probably have a track record that backs those arguments up. But believe me, this is who I'll be if you elect me. So they're already starting off, right, from a less convincing perspective because they're the challenger. Then throw in the fact that the incumbent has money. It is seldom the case that an incumbent running for re-election is short on cash because they've already won an election. They've got lobbyists and interest groups and people that are donating, right, to their campaign funds because they like the track record they see. They're in office. Odds are they're going to win again. So give money to that person that's going to be in office. And the challenger is like trying to make the case for your money, right? Please donate to me. I will be better than the person that I'm running against. That money will be well spent. And I'm a voter with money going, challengers win at best 10, 12% of the time. So any money I invest in your campaign is most probably lost money. This incumbent is most likely money invested that when I call to talk to them as a member of an interest group or a lobbyist or a constituent, and a campaign contributor, they'll be in office and they'll look at that and they'll go, oh, you're a contributor. I do have 30 minutes of my time that I can give to you. And I know that up front because they're an incumbent running for re-election. So who am I going to give my money to? Now, an interest group that's smart is going to give money to both of them, but they're going to give the maximum amount of money to the incumbent and some money to the challenger, right? Because what they're going to do is say, this money I'm spending on the incumbent is money well spent. If I'm wrong, although I'm probably not, I better spend some money on the challenger over here so that I can claim to be, right, a supporter of them as well. So it's not unusual when you go look at the public records of monies contributed that you find groups contributing to incumbents and challengers. Different amounts usually, but to both. Interesting enough. Okay, so we're out of time. So we will pick up with slide 11 next week, right? And continue talking. And I will send out a email and an announcement on the board saying that we've moved the exam window from opening on the 31st to opening on the 1st. So that we can get all of chapter 6 in there. Glad you enjoyed it. You guys have a good weekend. And we'll get back together on Tuesday.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a good
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for participating.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Same to Lauren and Vern and Samantha and right. We had Iris. We had quite a few participate today. That was good.